Soul Naked, your podcast all about embodied healing and sacred sensuality. I am Tanya Hirsch, and this podcast is intended to guide you home to your truth and feminine power. Each episode is designed to inspire you to create a pleasure-filled life that is in alignment with your soul. Let's drop the mask and dive right in.
Our infinity, our divinity.
Welcome back, my loves, to the Soul Naked podcast. Today I have Amy Rushworth on the podcast, and it was such a profound, deep, authentic, beautiful conversation. If you don't know Amy, Amy is a empowerment coach and mentor. She helps women to become unapologetic in their pleasure and power. She does the deep, deep inner healing work. She works with rebirthing, breathwork, and she talks about all the areas that some people would call naughty or taboo, like sexual healing. And we talked about so many juicy, important topics. She shared about her own personal healing journey a lot, and we even dove into sexual healing. She shares her experience with that and how she experienced sexual abuse and alchemized that pain and releasing the emotions that were stuck in her body to help other women now in such a beautiful way. And we talked about rebirthing breathwork and how it can get you really deep into your first months, weeks of life. Even it goes even back to the memories of your womb, how your mom carried you if you were wanted in this life, how the imprint on you in the womb and how you came into this world, how your birth imprinted you, and it shows up in different patterns, in different and in your personality, how you walk through life. And through this breathwork technique, you can go back into the first years of life and release the root of these causes, why you established these patterns in the first place. So she shares her experience, and she could even tell some things about my birth, and it's an amazing conversation. I really felt expanded and inspired, and I hope it inspires you to dive even deeper on your healing journey, because some healing modalities, they go back into childhood, and we sometimes don't understand why we still feel a certain way or why we act a certain way. And then for me, everything changed when I went into the root of my first months of life, even in the womb, of the way your mother carried you. If you were wanted, if you were an accident, all of this imprints how you come into this world, if you feel welcomed, we talk a lot about this in this conversation, so I can't wait for you to listen to this. Make sure to follow Amy. She's an amazing, beautiful, authentic, powerful leader and an embodied example of this work. So without further ado, let's welcome Amy Rushworth to the Soul Naked podcast. Welcome to the Soul Naked podcast, Amy. I'm so excited to dive deep with you today.
Thank you for having me. I love the name of your show.
And that's my first question that I ask all of my interview guests. What does Soul Naked mean to you right now in this moment? What comes up?
It's like being the brightest, fullest, truest expression of who you are. And I guess burning down all the rules, the stories, the expectations that you put on yourself or society puts on you, and just like blazing forward as who you really are, like unfiltered, unapologetic, and just so you.
I loved it. And it's also a big part of your mission. So how much would you say right now in your life, at this stage of your journey, how much can you allow your true essence, your light, to shine into the world? From a scale from 1 to 10.
I'm off the scale. I'm completely off the scale. I consider myself a very unapologetic woman. It doesn't mean that I don't, have my own wounds and things that have come up throughout my life, but, it's been part of my healing journey, and then also my mission in the world to really be the embodiment of what it means to be unapologetically yourself. And for me and for many other women, that's usually examining where you think you have to be one way or the other, or you have to hide one part of yourself in order to be taken seriously, or only some parts of you are acceptable. And so for me, like a huge part of my every single day is examining, like, where am I putting those, this or that scenarios on myself? Where am I saying, oh, I can't be this, I have to change into this? And so yeah, I would say like 10 out of 10 or off the scale, but it's something I'm always working on as well.
I loved it. And I wish every woman gets to that point at some point in their journey, that they really allow themselves to be authentic and to be all of them, and not to hide some parts that don't feel safe to be shown. And I'm curious, if you take us back on your journey, the areas where you are unapologetic right now, how did that evolve during your path? Like, which areas did you not allow your light to shine, your expression to come through in the past, where you do now?
Yeah, so my history and my backstory is a huge part of who I am, why I am the way that I am today, and the work that I do. So I suppose it'd be very easy to look at me now and be like, well, of course, like, you're a badass, like, look at all these things that you do, and like, all the things that we can assume on a first impression. But my journey into spirituality and healing actually began at a pretty dark rock bottom in my early 20s, diagnosed with PTSD. I'd been in a very long downward spiral, and I was one of those gals that acted confident on the outside, but I was very depressed. I was very self-critical. I was self-harming in a lot of ways through addictive behaviors, through substance abuse. And I was deeply, deeply unhappy with who I was, and struggling with trauma that I didn't really know was there until I started addressing it. And as I went through therapy, and then I started exploring coaching, spirituality, getting more into somatic healing and somatic sexual healing as well, I started becoming aware. It was like glaringly obvious all the ways that I'd been this doormat in my life, or I was living inauthentically, presenting myself as this kind of vivacious, confident person who would always just go with the flow and no worries, and I'd try and be perfect for everyone else, when I was actually really self-destructing inside, and nobody knew. Nobody even knew that I was in such a dark place. And so I started to very slowly question a lot of my behaviors, a lot of my tendencies. Instead of just glossing over things, I started getting more curious and trying to create new behaviors, to have hard conversations, to not just go with the flow, to stand up for myself, to set boundaries. And this is obviously a very long process, but the end result of that is that I feel like I became a completely different person, but the person that I am is actually the truest version of me, not the version of me that was built on protection mechanisms and trauma responses. And so that's also why I'm so passionate about what I do, because I've seen what's possible through my own journey of going from, suicidal ideation and PTSD to someone who has her dream life. And I'm genuinely joyful and happy every single day, and have a very strong spiritual faith and a strong connection to myself. And I feel like I can do anything. So that's why I share this work so proudly, because it not only changed my life, but saved it in many ways.
Thank you for sharing that so openly. And I love what you said, because we can get so lost in the healing and the death and the rebirth, and then we don't know who we are when we're dying, and we don't know what's coming out on the other side, and we don't know who we are without this trauma and the patterns. But when we come out on the other side, we realize it's always been us. Underneath those layers, this was our true essence, but it didn't feel safe to really show up in the world. And then the more layers we shed, the more we come I feel it's like a coming back home to our baby self that was shining unapologetically.
Yes. Literally, I think about how it was when I was very, very young. So like 3 or 4 years old from what I remember, and then what my mum has, you know, told me about how I was. And I literally feel like her and I are just twin sisters. Like I, you know, was confident and vivacious and just joyful and optimistic, and I would talk to anyone, and I'd always go and like talk to strangers on the airplane and like hold random people's hands on the street, and I was just full of love and hope and confidence that hadn't been tainted by life yet. And so I feel like I kind of came home to her. So I love that you said that.
And can you give us a few examples of how this looks like compared to the old Amy before you did the deep healing work? Like, how does this show up in everyday little moments of life?
Yeah, well, in so many ways, like so every now and then I actually would share a photo of myself when I was deep in rock bottom on my social media, and people actually don't even believe that it's me because I look so different. You can physically see the pain and the trauma in my face. And I don't even look like how I do now. I think I look younger now than what I did, you know, 10 or 15 years ago. Emotionally, I'm able now to have really deep, intimate relationships that are really soulful, really reciprocal, deep, fun, close. You know, there's no shame, there's vulnerability. I never had relationships like that back then before I'd done any healing. You know, I was very avoidant. And so a lot of my friendships and relationships were mirroring that back as well with other avoidant people. We didn't have deep conversations, you know, and that was why when I was at this rock bottom, I didn't have really anyone to call, and I didn't really share it with anyone because I didn't have the tools or the vocabulary to do so. I was also in a lot of toxic dynamics with men, you know, and attracting avoidant men. They were mirroring all my issues, my daddy issues, my abandonment issues. And, you know, I was just like going through the motions back then and ticking boxes externally, like, yep, got this job, got this house, got all these clothes, going to the gym, doing this, like on paper, trying to do everything right. But I just felt completely empty and very lost. And so, you know, it makes me sad to think about it, but it also, I'm also proud because even through all that, like that version of me was the one who chose to heal and, you know, take the steps to where I am now.
I love the check boxes you just mentioned. I was in a relationship a few years ago. It's been 6 years already with a narcissist, like an emotional abusive relationship. And I wasn't aware back then that it was abusive. I just knew something was off, but it looked so nice on the outside. And I almost felt like one of these check boxes. I felt like he just wanted a house. When we looked at houses, I just felt like, you know, a byproduct. It's not ours. It's just something that needs to be checked off. I felt like he wants me to be the mother of his children, but it always felt like a checklist, and my soul felt so empty, even though our life looked so amazing. We had a yoga studio, we were traveling. On the outside, he seemed so perfect. And I even made myself think I'm the crazy one because it didn't make sense. But the soul knew, my soul was so clear that something is not right here. And this led me to this deep journey, and I realized on how many areas in my life I had people that were checking boxes because I didn't meet myself this deep. Even my grandparents, when I decided to leave my job as a school teacher, that was the last box I checked for them. And then our connection completely went into different directions because I didn't turn out as the version they wanted me to. And I feel when we walk this path, we have to be really devoted to our soul and to stay true to ourselves, because sometimes the outside crumbles are really hard to handle if we lose people that we loved and we thought we're going to spend the rest of our lives with. And everything realigns. But when we walk, the further we walk, we realize how important that was for our growth and for our mission. So I'm curious, when you take us back, what were the tools and the healing methods and the moments that changed your life the most on this healing journey? Was it the breath work you talked about? Was it, sometimes it's even the little moments, like one encounter with a person can change everything.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's been some amazing modalities that have supported me on the path. So probably the most profound and the one that I never shut up about is rebirthing breathwork. And I am a teacher and facilitator of that work now. And so I've not only experienced huge transformation from having that and a lot of healing and integration of very deep traumas of mine, I've also seen it impact thousands of women that I've worked with and shared the medicine with. But what I would love to actually offer in regards to this question, I would say the pivotal healing moments that really, really helped me, but in the moment, I didn't realize this, was actually the moments of like, challenge where I was building resilience and I was choosing like the higher path despite that challenge, despite that resistance. So an example that I was thinking of as you were sharing your story as well is like when I started going on this trauma healing journey, I lost a lot of friends and I was isolated for the most part. And that was incredibly challenging. And there was even a few experiences where, I had friends that were like thinking that I was being really strange or really weird, or they were getting angry at me because I stopped drinking alcohol and I went sober. And I then tried with like the resources and communication skills that I had at the time to share, well, actually, I'm going through a really deep healing journey because I'm having flashbacks of really serious abuse when I'm a child, right? So I'm trying to tell them this. And then I found like some of them would like distance themselves or they didn't know how to actually meet me in that vulnerability. And of course, like our deepest need is to be connected and we don't want to be abandoned. And in those moments, I could have just been like, oh, okay, I came out of my shell. That worked out terribly. I'm never going to do that again. And I'm just going to settle for this, like, surface level relationship and not bring my heart and my truth. But instead, I chose to actually maybe lose those connections temporarily or forever and to walk on my own for a bit and to like bolster myself up while I was in that in between of like these relationships ending and new ones, that were still yet to come. And that takes an incredible amount of courage for anyone to do. I know a lot of women go through this when they go on a healing or spiritual journey. They can feel really alienated. It takes so much courage to lift yourself up and to keep prioritizing your healing in those moments and putting your truth first and following it. And so I would say like the little but very big turning points to me have always been in the depths of challenges and like the resistance and the void periods, but we always like dislike them when we're going through it, of course.
Yes. Oh, I love that you shared that. And I feel that's why we are so passionate about creating sacred spaces for women or people so they don't need to go through this isolation and lonely wolf period, because it can be really challenging if nobody gets you, if everyone falls apart, and you have to have the strength to see the truth that it's not about you, but that this needs to crumble, and you need to trust in the void that whatever comes out is for your highest good. But it needs practice. Like I needed a few of these voids and rebirths to realize at the end it always turns out well. The butterfly, even if we can't see it in the caterpillar phase, we always need to trust to something bigger, that even if we can't see it yet, we can't have it yet, we want to know so badly what comes out. We need the trust in the darkness to come out on the other side. I totally agree on that. It's always the the moments where you think you cannot do another day of this, when you surrender and you release the resistance that you need to know. That's the moment I feel where there comes the ease back and the lightness.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I would love to dive into another topic that I know you're also passionate about. I would love to know about your sexual healing journey.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is a big one for me because it was a huge part of my PTSD and my, consequential healing journey. And it's also a really big pillar of the work that I offer in the world. So, like I said, diagnosed with PTSD in my early 20s, but I was at that time very disassociated, and I didn't have like a ton of memories from my childhood. So when I received this diagnosis, I wasn't really sure like why I was struggling with that. I was going through like a very hard breakup at the time, and there was like a lot of betrayal, and I was very isolated. And so I thought, gosh, like this is obviously just like had a really traumatic effect on me. But 2 years into my healing journey, when I was actually doing really well, and I was in a new relationship that was very safe and very loving, I started having flashbacks, and those flashbacks revealed to me my original traumas of my PTSD, which was sexual abuse when I was a child. And that was very confronting. Obviously, it's pretty confronting to be standing in your room and then all of a sudden you're 10 years old and experiencing the past like it's happening in front of you. And it was quite confusing because I was like, well, I'm doing so well. I've been healing for like 2 or 3 years now, and I feel the best I've ever felt. I feel the most resourced, and I just like started training, doing my first coaching training when this was happening. So it was kind of strange for me, but it was a really powerful turning point because suddenly I realized, oh, okay, this is actually the deepest root of what was going on. And this is why I was disassociated from my body. This is why I behaved in all these erratic ways with my sexuality in the past, like going from being sort of hypersexual, but not from like a grounded, authentic place, from a space of trauma, and then periods of numbness. And my womb and my body had actually been trying to tell me this for a long time, but I didn't, have that vocabulary or that awareness of any of this stuff. So this part of my experience is what led me to exploring somatic sexology and different body-based practices, and then also rebirthing breathwork and starting to work more with my body rather than just thinking about it from a top-down approach through therapy, through talking, through coaching, through journaling and mindset. Because for me, this wasn't a mindset issue. This was a traumatic imprint that was in my body. And, pleasure and sensation, they're body-based experiences. So I started exploring that and had incredible healing as a result, feeling very empowered, feeling new kinds of pleasure and sensations that hadn't been available to me before, and feeling just, like a badass bitch in this area. Like, whereas it had been like this painful, taboo, weird area, as it is for a lot of women, and especially survivors of trauma and, survivors of assault. And then I trained in it, and I continued to support other women to, engage with their sexuality and their sensuality in the way that feels good for them, instead of the way that we've been conditioned to approach it.
Thank you so much for sharing that so vulnerably. And that's true alchemy, to turn your biggest pain. You could have decided to live your life numb and hiding and disassociated for the rest of your life, but you chose to go back to these moments that were too painful to feel in the past, and to find gold through feeling them, through releasing them. And now you have this beautiful business sharing and helping other women so they don't have to take the long road that you needed to get there, but that really can help. Like, I feel this work is so powerful that it's like a highway to your soul. and all the conditioning can fall away if you're willing to back it up and to really go there.
Yeah.
And I feel the less memory we have of our childhood. I also thought I don't have trauma. I'm fine until we dive deeper, and the deeper we go, the more comes back, and our body remembers every single memory. Even if the mind doesn't remember, suddenly these memories come up and you remember in that moment, but your whole life you could be able to forget about them. And I feel the more we forgot of our childhood and the more we think we don't have trauma, the more suppressed it is, and it's longing to be felt and to come up. And breathwork is such a beautiful tool to bring these subconscious layer, this deep trauma, to the surface. Can you share a little bit about your rebirthing breathwork that you're working with?
Yeah, so rebirthing is probably a little bit lesser known than some of the more popularized versions of breathwork, like holotropic breathwork, transformational. Most people know who Wim Hof is, but they actually all stem originally from rebirthing, which is different in that it is breathing through the nose rather than breathing through the mouth. So nose breathing and mouth breathing on the surface level kind of look the same in terms of you're breathing in this circular motion. It's a conscious connected breath, and it's sending you into some kind of like transcendental state or consciousness. But breathing through the nose and breathing through the mouth do totally different things to your body and your nervous system. So when you breathe through the nose in a slow, conscious, connected breath, you are actually putting your nervous system into the parasympathetic state, which is like the restful, calm state. Now, this is really powerful if you do have trauma, because if you have trauma and you're already stressed or holding on to a lot of toxic stress, memories, traumatic imprints, if you're breathing through your mouth really intensely all the time, you're putting your body into fight or flight, and your body is already in a state of fight or flight. And so you might have these very sensational, large, dramatic experiences, but over the long term, if you want sustainable healing and to actually create a healthy vagus nerve and a healthy nervous system that can respond fluidly to stress and to life, you want to be doing that kind of release in a more trauma mindful way, which is why I love rebirthing breathwork, because a lot of my clients, similar to me, have had traumatic experiences with their sexuality, but just also in their life with their upbringings. And so I love it because we can get down into the roots of these imprints and let them go without overstimulating that person's nervous system. So they can still cry, they still feel a lot, it can still be quite intense, but it's a nervous system friendly approach and a trauma-informed approach to this kind of release. The other thing that is really interesting that I love to share about rebirthing, the name rebirthing isn't just like a name that sounds cool that's pulled out of thin air. The rebirthing ideology and school of thought says that we are being imprinted with patterns, memories, ways of seeing the world and ourselves from the moment that we are conceived in utero. So if I was to work with someone one-on-one, I would actually ask them a lot of questions. I would ask them, how were you conceived? Was it an accident? Was it planned? Were you the gender your parents wanted? What was going on with your mom during pregnancy? Was she stressed? Was there any miscarriages before you or abortions? All these things, because your nervous system is developing in utero, in your mother's belly from a few weeks into pregnancy. And what's happening is your nervous system is taking all this information from your mother, like, what kind of world am I coming into, and getting prepared for that. So understanding what your mother was going through, how you were conceived, what's the context there, gives us a context for how your nervous system was built, ready to take on life. And also our actual birth creates imprints. So we ask questions like, was there intervention? Was there forceps on your head? Were you a really long traumatic birth? How did they touch you when they took you out? Like, because they used to do things like slap babies to get them to breathe, and probably they still do in some places. So we ask questions like that, and then also around like your early childhood. And what I can see when someone's breathing with that information and watching the way that they breathe, I can usually tell sort of very loosely, what are the patterns that you have in your life? What are the patterns of self-sabotage? How do you see life? How safe do you feel to receive support from people? How supported do you feel by life? What do you feel you deserve? What scarcity is there for you? We can literally create a picture of all of this through rebirthing breathwork, and then through the breath itself, slowly, sustainably start to release any of those patterns that aren't actually serving you, that aren't helping you to live a blissful life. And so when we open up the breath, we start to open up those imprints and those patterns and let them go in a way that isn't going to overwhelm you.
Wow, that sounds so powerful. And this part was really new for me, that it goes back that far and that you can read so much. And I work a lot with baby trauma too. I work more on the quantum field, where we go back into the memories and they see their baby selves, so they feel what they needed and they didn't receive, because that was my journey too. My parents were very young, and then my mom already had one child. My sister got really sick and everything was already like on the edge. And then my birth was so quick. It was 20 minutes and I almost came between cars. It felt like I wanted to do it for her, to not be a burden, because that was my biggest trauma, to feel like a burden and not wanted and always hide and not say anything, because I didn't want the system to crumble in our family. And it's been the deepest work I needed to do in the first moments of life, where I needed the love and I needed the warmth and feeling wanted and appreciated. And I didn't have that. I got that when I was 1 year old from my grandma. But before that, the first year of life, there was not much love. And this imprinted my whole life until I discovered it was actually the first year where this was established. And it's hard to get there because you can't remember. And if nobody tells you, how should you know? But then these memories came back. I could feel myself as a baby feeling this need for love, and it explained so much. I understood so much why I was looking for it on the outside, and my journey was really descending into the body and filling this hole with the love that I already have inside, that changed all the patterns and everything surrounded by that. And I'm curious, how was your birth, your personal birth experience when you came into this world?
My birth was interesting. The important thing, like, to just sort of preface in here is, like, every single person has some sort of thing that has affected them, right? So these are like deep patterns, but these patterns are learned and they can be unlearned. So no matter what your experience, or if someone's listening who's given birth and they, had a really traumatic birth and now they're stressing that they've like screwed their kid up, do not worry, be compassionate. All of these things are like things that we get affected by, and then we can also heal from them, and they don't have to ruin our life, right? My birth, it all begins at conception. I was an accidental conception. My mother conceived me while on the pill, but she had gastro, and so the pill didn't work. And this had already happened once before to her, right? And then I came again. The joke is I came the first time and then I came again.
It's you? It was you?
That's what I think, right? And that's why I think I had like trust issues towards my mom for a little bit, right? But that's my intuition. Then in terms of like her being pregnant with me, she was working right up until she gave birth. She went back to work, I think 6 weeks after she gave birth to me. I think money was maybe a little bit of like a slight issue. So there was scarcity and fear, and she was becoming a new mom. And, she didn't know if they were ready. My parents hadn't been together for too long. My dad is kind of like Peter Pan, never going to grow up. He's still the same. He's like 65 and he's still like that. So that's what was going on. And then in the actual birth, she was in labor with me, I think, for 36 hours. And she didn't want to have an epidural. And then eventually she had one. I don't think it worked. I think it was too late or something. I don't know. And then they couldn't really get me out. So my family jokes, I was having a party inside. So they were trying all these things, like they put the vacuum on my head. They tried to pull me out. I think they eventually got me out with forceps. I think that's the tool that actually got me out. But, you know, they put me on her very briefly, but then I was separated from her again because they had to check all my vitals because I'd been, you know, stuck in there for a long time and they were concerned. So all of those kinds of things are the things that I examined when I first started my rebirthing journey, and we worked with, and it's very obvious these patterns that were left for me. And then for you, like the opposite, being born really fast, which is the same as my husband, when you like shoot out really fast and sometimes you've got the cone head when you come out. The patterns that you might be mindful of in your life is feeling like you always have to like rush and get loads of things done and be really productive, and you can't like feel safe just being present and like really enjoying like the fruits of your life. You always have to like try and like tick things off and like get it done and be fast and like not put pressure on other people, like do it yourself. And obviously if you've done a lot of healing, some of those patterns may have resolved themselves, but that's what you would look for in a really, really fast birth.
Totally. This was the biggest part for me, to ask for help, because it always felt like a death. Every time I asked my mom for help, she would react annoyed. So I created my whole life not needing to ask for help. And this has been the most profound experience, to see there are actually people out there that love to help, and that I don't have to give something back in return, to open my heart so much to see that it's beautiful to have both to give and to receive and to ask for help. And it can actually be a beautiful thing and not always have this wound triggered. Like when I really went to the root, I don't feel the reaction anymore, even if someone acts like, oh, can you not do it yourself? I'm not having this steel knife in my heart, like, oh my God, I'm a burden and I'm not lovable. It's like, I can see the mirror to face it towards me, when it's my mind to look at, and when it's not about me, and I can face the mirror back to this person.
Yeah.
How did it show up in your life, your birth experience? And what were the patterns that you needed to work through from this profound experience?
Yeah. Well, I mean, physically, there was this one session where I had a headache on the two sides of my head where the forceps had been, like after the session. And so I knew then, I was like, oh, okay, we let something really big go today. Wow. Emotionally speaking, the patterns that I started working with were around, you know, like similar to you in a way, like allowing other people to meet my needs and not feeling like I'm just always, you know, bad news to someone. You know, I think also because I was like the accidental pregnancy, and it was very like, oh my goodness, it was like, you know, it wasn't probably good news in the beginning. I always felt this thing of like, I don't want to be bad news or be bad. I don't want to be bad. So I want to do everything to be perfect and sort of self-sustaining. And part of that is probably also around like, you know, the early years of my life, because my mum went back to work so soon. And even though I was loved and physically cared for, you know, rebirthing, they say that you don't know you're a separate person to your mother till you're 18 months old. So if your mother isn't there, you have no one, you're missing a part of yourself. And babies don't have the ability to self-regulate, right? So they co-regulate with their caregiver. So if you're a primary caregiver who you also think is like the same person as you is not there, and you have to try and soothe yourself, that's actually a traumatic experience for a baby because they can't self-soothe. And so, you know, sleep training and things like that, all of these things can have an impact on how you then grow up and learn how to be in the world. So a lot of independent woman things for me, feeling unable to share my emotions or vulnerability, because the lesson that I received is like, either you'll just be really annoying and holding everyone up and being bad news, or no one's coming anyway. So why would you ask? No one's going to help. You're going to have to do it yourself and just numb out and survive. And yeah, so I've rewritten many of these things for myself. Thank goodness.
Wow. It's so beautiful to see how deep this work goes, and that sometimes we cannot understand why we act a certain way. And then when we really go back to these moments that society even tells us it's not, like, now it's proven, but when I grew up, people said it's not important when the baby, you know, when it screams, just let her scream. It's okay. She won't remember, but it imprints us on such a deep level.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe for the rest of our lives if we don't go there. So,
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, Gabor Mate, you know, probably the world's best trauma expert, he, like, I don't know the exact quote, but I've heard him speak to like a lot of the sleep training protocols and the way that we've been taught to like make babies behave or sleep a certain way are actually like almost abusive practices to children, because yes, it's annoying and overwhelming and probably at times traumatic for adults to have a baby be dependent on you. And I also cannot speak from a place of having lived through that because I don't have children yet. But from the perspective of knowing, you know, what happens to our nervous systems through my own scope of practice, leaving babies alone to cry when they don't know how to soothe themselves is leaving like a creature that doesn't know how to defend themselves in the most pain they've ever felt, and they have no tools to be able to calm themselves down or feel it. And so when very young babies are self-soothing, that's actually not factually like possible that they're self-soothing. They're probably disassociating or going into like a trauma response and falling asleep so that they're not in pain. So obviously many of us were sleep trained. You know, you can still have a full and beautiful life, but knowing the impacts on things, on you from things like that, I think is helpful information so that you can understand like, oh, how can I like more healthily perceive myself? How can I work on like asking for support? How can I work on like healing the things that this left on me so that I can be free?
Yes. And I feel those children, and I was one of them, and you too, they go extreme. Either they become the sunshine kid that wants to make everyone happy, and that's really easy. Everyone told me I was so easy. They could just leave me somewhere and I would sleep or paint for hours and I didn't say anything. And then there's the rebels that like try to get the love and attention through extroverted behavior, like screaming and rebelling and stealing and whatever the coping mechanisms are. And it's interesting to see both extremes actually go back to the same trauma or the same wound.
Yeah. That's literally me and my brother. He was like the difficult one and very sensitive, emotional. He cried for like 3 years through the night. Me, like everyone was like, she's such a good girl because we could just, you know, leave you anywhere for hours doing the things like you were saying you did. And, you know, that was one of the patterns that came from, you know, my birth of having all these people intervene and all this drama. And it's like, hurry up, we got to get it out. Like it's this big drama. And so it was like, I never want to be bad again. So I'm never going to be the bearer of bad news, which meant I wouldn't share negative emotions, which meant, you know, when I had PTSD and, you know, suicidal ideation, I never thought to like call my parents and be like, I'm not okay, because that was just like not the role that I was used to being in. And so like for some people, it's actually learning how to like feel negative emotions again and to be like, yeah, I'm angry. Yeah, I'm struggling and I still deserve to be loved. You know, I think for a lot of us, that's actually like the hard work, not being more positive.
Yes, and to see the beauty also in it. I had a pretty profound ayahuasca ceremony a few weeks ago, and I literally left my body. Like I went into a different dimension in space, and I became a soul in space. I didn't even have thoughts or emotions or a body. I was just an energy in space. And then I became a liquid in space that was holding the wisdom of the universe, but I didn't have a human experience anymore. I just felt like pure love, pure consciousness, pure wisdom, everything's connected, telepathically communication, but I didn't have this human experience. And then I realized why I signed up for my path and why this human experience is so special. We are the only planet in the world where we can have emotions and where we can have senses, so we can see and touch and smell and love. And yes, it's a dense planet full of duality, full of darkness, full of light, full of beauty, full of rawness. And I realized how, even though I've been already like really deep in my journey, how I still tried to more chase the light. And I saw that both of these emotions, the density, the duality, makes it beautiful. We sign up for all of it. And I realized how much for granted I took that, and sometimes even complained like, oh, it's so hard, and I don't even know if I want this anymore. And then I saw, wow, this human experience is such a gift. And all of it, we really, as a soul, we are longing to have this experience because it's boring up there, kind of. Of course, we have the love and everything, but we don't have all of this. And every soul is like so excited to come on earth, but we forget about this. And we forgot that we also signed up for the rage and the anger and the sadness and the grief, all of the emotions that just want to be felt. And the more we cut ourselves off from it, the more we suffer, because it's part, the energy wants to flow. And the more we try to pretend it's not there, the more our life gets out of alignment, and the more we will get into a state disconnected from our soul. And this was really profound for me, because I felt I came back into my body, and it took me a week to really ground back into my body. The gratitude of every single day and every single moment. And I have to remind myself, of course, the more I come back into my human experience, if there's a really hard moment that my ego and my human self doesn't like, to remember this feeling of like, I chose it and I'm grateful. Even if my human self wants to resist it, it's such a blessing to have all of it and to allow it to flow. And I feel the more we dig deep in our healing journey, and the more we allow it to be there without making it mean something about us or recreating the stories that we're not lovable if we show these emotions, the more liberating it gets, and the more our true expression can shine too through these layers, because these layers, they keep us stuck in a dim position that just wants to radiate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much for this conversation. I loved it. So unexpected to dive into the baby part, but I love talking.
Yeah, babies, ayahuasca, sex, trauma, all my favorite topics.
All the things.
Yeah.
I have one last question that I ask out of my interview guests, and I invite you to close your eyes for this one. So if you could travel back in time, and you could tell maybe your baby self, maybe your child self, something that you've learned along your journey that would have helped you immensely on your path, what would you tell young Amy, and what age pops up for you?
The weirdest, sassiest thing came to me.
Perfect.
Don't take shit.
Yes.
So, like, people often ask me that on podcasts, what would you go back and say? And sometimes I struggle to answer, because I really believe, like, in all the trauma and chaos and pain, like all of that even though some of that shouldn't have happened, it did happen, and it's led me to where I am today. And I'm very grateful for where I am today and for the strength that it created in me. So it's like almost this weird question, because I'm like, well, maybe I wouldn't say anything because I feel like everything kind of went where it was supposed to go. But that would be something that I might say, like, don't take shit, because I had that like good girl thing going on. And so I just kind of let people walk over me. I didn't tell anyone about the abuse. Like, there were so many situations where I just swallowed it all for everyone else, to keep everyone else warm while I set myself on fire. And so I would probably like go up to her and like whisper that in her ear, really like in a really sassy way, and hope that she took it on board.
Oh, I loved it. And what age did you see? Was there a certain age?
Well, I thought of myself like early on in high school, where you're kind of leaving your family unit and you're finding your belonging like outside of the immediate tribe, and I think those are really formative years for girls. And so much shit happens, so much sisterhood wounding and heartbreak and grief. And like, I feel like, if that version of me was my daughter now, I would be that mom who like went into the school and like, and like stood up for her. And so, yeah, I would have, I guess, wished that she had more of that like fire inside to stand up for herself.
You will be that mom one day.
I'm already like this with my friends, like if someone someone like tries to fight me, I'm like, I'm not fighting with you. Like if someone is mean to like someone I love or one of my friends, I am literally like, I'm going to go protect you. I'm the fucking quintessential Leo.
I loved it. I have the same, especially the things that are, if a man tells a woman, don't eat that, you like already curvy. Even as a teenager, I would like almost rage, step on the table. And yeah, I feel if it's so dear to our heart because we didn't receive it, we become this lioness mom that just doesn't want that same feeling for other people.
Yeah, totally.
How can people connect to your work, to your magic?
Instagram's a great place. My handle is This is Amy Rushworth. If you like the vibe, I would recommend turning the notifications on, because I get really heavily shadow banned because I talk about all these naughty topics, and they like to hide me from everyone. So Instagram, or my podcast is The Amy Rushworth Show, and all my courses and stuff are on amyrushworth.com.
Amazing. We will link it in the show notes. Thank you so much, Amy.
Thank you.
I hope this conversation expanded you, inspired you. Make sure to follow Amy on Instagram. And it would mean the world to me if you leave a review, if you share this episode with someone who might benefit from this conversation. And I see you next week. Much love.